thank you all. I'm thrilled, as I said, that you all come to document this wonderful part of TACC's history. And I'm especially glad that Bill could come and be part of it, because I know you go way back.
And we are so happy to be here. Bill and I talked about that last night. This is just an important time for us. It's an important time of remembrance.
Yeah.
And my wife Carolyn and Hakika and Charlie's wife were all, they were all part of this early experience, which started here at St. Luke's.
Yeah.
I think there are times in life where it seems like the stars line up or the opportunity comes, and we were just reflecting on that last night. It was such an incredible time. The church was going through a transition, and from a type of church to having to kind of reboot. And the minister here, Tom Bowers, would invite almost anybody with anything, come to the church, let's try it out. So in the basement of St. Luke's, this is mid-'70s, early '70s, we had an alternative high school for troubled high school kids.
That's right.
We had a community kitchen at the parish hall level, and had to come up the steps. And we thought, Peter's vision, this is a great training opportunity, right? I mean, we've got all this material, but a brand new idea back then.
Yeah.
We had not done it in a parish.
One of the things I want to say right on the front end, I want to mention our wives, because all of our wives were involved in the early soup kitchen experience. And they were very important to a lot of the development that went on.
We always hope not to get found out, Peter.
Edie was, she was there, Carolyn was there, and even our son Peter, I think he was 8 years old at that point, he came in, and I may tell that story later on, but it's important to know that this was a very important time. I was at Georgia Mental Health Institute, started in 1971 to take Clinical Pastoral Education. And I went ahead and spent 3 years doing that, and in the course of that 3 years, I went ahead and had the opportunity to become a clinical chaplain supervisor, and also a marriage and family psychotherapist, and was certified by the American Association of Marriage and Family Counseling.
So you did all your sort of training and education there.
Right there.
Wow.
But one of the things that happened that, and Charlie will remember this, that in the 70s, 71, 72, the rector of the church decided to leave, and all of a sudden they didn't have all of their ministers here, and so Carolyn and I had come to church here, and I was asked to come and help some with the services, and then the next thing you know, I was running the adult class. You remember that, Charlie? And I mean, all of a sudden we had a lot of people there, and I realized that a lot of them really needed somebody to counsel. So that was going on, and then Bill Milliken was running the Street Academy.
Neil Shorthouse.
Neil Shorthouse, yeah, both of them. And then the next thing you know, we decided, Jenny Pearson, what was happening really was that a lot of the men were coming in off the street asking for some money to have some food. And so the church had a way of giving them a piece of paper to go down to one of the restaurants and get something to eat. And they would line up for this. And I realized that, I'd sit down there and watch them. And in one of our conversations, it came up about the fact that, you know, we should be feeding them in the parish hall. And that's how it started to do, and then all of a sudden we had some people who jumped to right up there in the middle of it and got it going.
I think in a larger context, Peter, a lot of churches had left town. Everybody was going to the suburbs.
Right.
St. Luke's and All Saints said, we're going to make a stand and stay here. But then you had to make a big decision. You're going to open your doors or you're going to lock your doors, right? So to open the doors meant more than just open.
That's
You're going to be in a
exactly right.
relationship with people. And they were hungry. And I think one of the things I learned very quickly from you, Peter, is that food was a great tool for engaging folks to listen to their story.
Right.
So.
I use that theologically in my own understanding in teaching students that the communion that we have every Sunday, and I started using that with the workers who came in. We would get them together to teach them how they could better respond. And I said, you know, all of you receive communion usually every Sunday. And if the priest was to come up to you and say, what you doing here? Or you got to get out of here. You know, if they had said, but it's the body of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is given for you. And in other words, there was a commonality. And I said, that's what we're needing to do with the soup kitchen.
Yeah.
And that was one of the beginning things. And then Bill added, he'll be telling you more how he got it really going. But that was a very important time. And some of the times, I know Carolyn brought our son one day, and he had all the peanut butter and jelly that he could eat, and was helping his mom at the counter. And a man came in with crutches, and the man couldn't receive the bread in the cup, and Carolyn said, Peter, who was his name, Peter, and you know, you can help him. And so Pete went around and got the cup and the bread, and immediately walked out into the hall there. And it was like the opening of the water, and you know, everybody moved back because this young boy was doing this, and he saw a place where he could put the bread, you know, and the drink down, and the soup, and all of a sudden it said to me, this is what we're about. And it was very powerful to me.
I think an important aspect in those early days, and this was the great advantage of having Peter and a staff here at the Training Counseling Center, is that to volunteer, you were required to go to Bible study, right? And we did that certainly all the years that we worked together.
That's
I don't think they do it now, but that was really an opportunity, again, to listen to the people who were serving, because they had their own story, often conflicted about nobody was thanking me enough, or people were rude, or where they sat. And all that was theological material, you know, to go deeper with folks. And I think that was the foundation that we stand on today, that it wasn't, there are 50 community kitchens around town. I'd say very few had that deep foundation. That this is it's not just sandwiches and soup and coffee. This is deeper than that.
That's
the St. Luke's seminary at Sewanee sent a group of students down, and they would have the students here for a weekend and set them free in the city to see what was going on. And they would always come to St. Luke's, and they came, I think, on a Friday, and one of the leaders of that group came up to me and said, something has just happened. And I said, what is that? I said, one of our people came in, and she saw her father for the first time 10 years. And I said, what's going on with that? And he said, well, he's on the streets.
Wow.
And so I said, I'd like to talk with her. And so we sat down and she began to cry and she said, I don't know what to do. And so we had,
That's
from
amazing.
there, we had some reconciliation. You remember that, I think. And I think Bill was involved in that, and I was involved in that.
So did she talk to her father?
I believe she did, yeah. And I don't know what the result of it was, but it was an important kind of thing that, again, there God was in the middle of all of that. And
it's really like creating the space for it to happen.
Yes.
It's not forcing it to happen, it's creating safe place.
Yeah.
And I think that's what TACC has represented all these years. A safe place, to come. I remember a story like it happened yesterday. I had a graduate degree in psychology and counseling and thought that that would be the work. It was ministry through counseling. So we would run the community kitchen until about 2 o'clock, clean up, and I would see clients in the afternoon off the street. So, I'm the street minister, but I'm doing counseling. And I can still remember, the office down in the basement of a young lady that came in with 2 kids, young kids, and I had lots of toys in there, so when you bring people in, and the kids are just bouncing off the wall because they're living outside, no structure. And I proceed to help this lady, and I got her MARTA tickets. I had an account down at the Capitol Hotel, got her a place to stay, got her some clothes, got her some cash, and I'm feeling very proud of myself. It's kind of like, give me another problem to solve, because I can solve your problems. And this was a turning point in my life. I remember her looking across and saying, Reverend Bill, you don't respect me, do you? And I'm thinking, oh my God, did I say something? Did I do something? And she said, I've been out here for 2 or 3 months. I know where all that is. I know how to get all that. I just need somebody to be with me. Not to judge me as a bad mother. Not to say that I'm a bad person because of my situation. So I realized then it wasn't the food, it wasn't the MARTA tickets. I mean, people need those things. But a deeper need is to be, it's just almost like a hug, like you're okay. And I'm willing to sit here and listen. And, that was worth 2 years of graduate school. That afternoon changed everything. Didn't need any more courses after
That's
that.
right.
I can remember one person, you probably remember, his name was Red. And one morning I came in to work, and I was parking in the old parking lot there next to the parish hall, and there was a empty dumpster there. And all of a sudden, Red, got his head up and he looked and he crawled out of there with one of his buddies. And I said, we're at the right place. We need to do something about this. But it was interesting that those people needed somebody not to preach at them, but to be with them and to listen to them and to care for them. And also that was something that we were feeling, in regards to the people who came in for counseling.
Exactly.
And that became...
That really, I think, was a value or a hallmark even today at TACC, that it is being with, not doing for.
That's right.
And there's plenty to do.
There is.
But the core of it is the being with.
Is to be with and to listen and care and love and walk with through the valley of the shadow of death, which I talk about.
So when you were here at TACC, you were also doing counseling, and you were the CPE director and the executive director. So you were doing all those things.
And the head of development and public relations and
fundraising and all that. Wow.
Yeah, we had wonderful people like Charlie and Edie Wright to help us. And and Jenny Pearson, you know, was always right there even after it started.
Martha Loki.
Yeah, I
mean,
can't remember. I'm
Ruffin
sorry.
Mason, or
Yeah.
Ruffin, just a great group.
So is that Loki? Is that the Loki from Emmaus House? You know
That was her sister.
Oh, it's her
Muriel.
sister. Okay,
And
Muriel.
Martha was here, and their
Wow.
husbands were
That's-
brothers, both attorneys.
Wow, that's amazing. I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah, Muriel's husband was actually a state legislator.
Oh, wow.
And I remember when I started the food bank, we had to get liability law passed.
I remember that.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, who's liable here? And, you know, I started food banks through the Episcopal network all over the Southeast, you know, to go from church to church. But he was very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, in fact, we couldn't have had the food bank here without going through the legislature. And he moved it right through very quickly because we had so many people coming in, and we didn't need to be outside of the law at that point. And we got it, I guess, within a couple of weeks, didn't we? Or
Yeah, we
something
got
like
through that session.
Yeah.
You know, I think going back to Peter playing all those roles, I often tell young people that naivete works until it doesn't. Go with it as long as you can, right? Meaning we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we're called to do it, and we'll figure it out. And it wasn't that we didn't stumble and make wrong decisions and have to reboot.
That's right.
But there was no question that we were going to keep moving forward and figure this out. And I just look back on that time and think that's the grace of God not to know. Like if I'd known what the food bank would be 40 years later, I would have said, not me. I can't do that. If we'd known, you know, what TACC would grow into, we'd probably said too much. Right? But that's the grace of God. Here's it in front of us. People need ministry.
And with that, I had to have a mentor, and that was Chuck. That was Chuck Gherkin. And also there was one of the psychiatrists, and I can't remember, but he came over here and worked some, and I'm blocking on his name. Pardon me?
Fulgham?
Charles Fulgham. Yeah. And so we, you know, had people that we were checking with at that particular time to keep our head on straight, and that was very, very helpful.
That's so helpful. That's definitely the CPE model.
Yeah.
Consultation.
Yeah.
You know, you might say, Peter, just a word about, we've had counseling centers for a long time, you know, in congregations, and CPE's been around for a long time. I think what was unique here is we put those two together. We might say something, Peter, about those early days of how they coexisted, right? Because people would come to the church for counseling and had to wade through the homeless to get there. Right? So, and then that oftentimes was what you began the counseling session with.
Right.
That was the first conversation. Said, no, I'm not coming to get any food.
But for them to
I've come to get fed.
For them to coexist in one place was something that we had. It was a tension that you had to live with, and we used it as kind of grist for the mill, right? It was a part of.
And there were a lot of people who came to help serve, and then would stay afterwards to have a session with one of the counselors, Bill or myself or the women who we had working. And so it was putting these two things together in a very important way.
Here's another one, Peter, and you were so helpful for me, is to find out when you're running a ministry like that, and you might have a few staff, a lot of volunteers, and then the clients we're serving, to find out that the folks that are volunteering their time, right, and really making a commitment, they were as hungry as the clients were, okay, and they were hungry for meaning, for a sense of their self, to work through their experiences. So I realized very quickly that I had to work both sides. It wasn't, you know, the homeless. Some of the homeless would minister to some of the volunteers, right?
Absolutely.
And that's how that happened.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So did you all, like, if you were working together in the early days, did you, and you ran into, you know, a conundrum, did you all sit down together, and was there a group of you that would kind of problem solve together, and how did that kind of work
together?
By the hour.
we were right together. I mean, I maybe over one side, he was over the other side, and then we come across.
No, there's a lot of. What do we do with this?
Do you remember the time that one of the people, you know, had a seizure on the floor? And
I remember Ronald Florence. That's who, and a 6'5" big guy. Had grand mal seizures at least twice a week.
And so he had it. And I remember the first time it happened, and I went over there, and I quite frankly didn't know what to do.
Right.
And Bill came, and then one of the people who was from the soup kitchen had been in the hospital many times. He immediately helped us get it all worked out. And we learned from him, and then
we actually brought those folks in and trained all the volunteers in epilepsy. Also, we did CPR training.
Yeah.
You know, because we had a very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Yeah.
You remember Peter Ronald grew up in Milledgeville, right? And his only problem as a child was he had epilepsy. But the parents didn't know, so they sent him, and he grew up in a mental hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
So when they de-institutionalized those, you know, and sent people, they sent them out on the street. So big Ronald, sweet guy, was always in trouble. But when he would get his disability check every month, he'd get on the bus and go to Milledgeville. He'd go home.
Yeah.
They had no place for him. The caseworker would call me up and say, Ronald's down here. And I'd say, well, if you can keep him overnight, put him back on the bus, and I'll meet him when he comes back.
Yeah,
right?
but his home
was his home.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really touching.
And then in the time that Jimmy, who was the governor, Carter, and he, all of a sudden the big mental hospitals stopped, and a lot of those people were on the streets, and that's when we had a real surge at that point of people coming to St. Luke's because they had heard about it at that point.
And that really speaks to the philosophy around getting the central hospitals and getting people out, because they could just get lost there, is that we would build community mental health centers. But what they created was for the kind of worried well. It was not a place for therapy. And that's why a place like TACC had to come along, you know, to do real work, because it was not being provided at that point.
Exactly. I went over to the soup kitchen this morning and just it was like I was seeing new faces, but I was seeing a lot of faces that I'd seen.
Yeah.
And that continues as a place where they could come, be fed, and then also some volunteers. They had a bunch of kids who were coming over there, I think, to work and learn about that. And it was wonderful.
Yeah, he got to see Clyde. And you know, Clyde has been the cook there for 40 years or something, a really long time. So I was really happy you got to meet him.
And I had to go up to the church and pray.
Of course.
We all have my place is about the 6th pew back on the left side. I go straight to, I even come over here sometimes just by myself.
Oh yeah, I had to do that this morning. It was such a deep memory. Yeah. But it was very important.
In a sense, we now talk about St. Luke's campus, right? Because we actually own the property between. This was actually a street before, Courier Street, so that got closed down. That's how you got into the food bank. But this whole property, the campus, I think, is sacred. many things.
Yeah.
We've had food banks, that building's gone. Counseling center was in the church. We had created a place here.
Yeah.
But you just think the history of a piece of land or a building or the things that happen there.
Exactly. Exactly. So important.
And I was touched, Bill, you told me a few times ago we were talking that you were given a certain award that has an eternal flame on it, and you decided to put it here
Yeah.
at St. Luke's. And
Yeah, it's
that-
right out front of the church.
That's really touching.
Yeah.
And tell us about that. That was to
Well,
honor.
that's, I don't want to talk about
Oh,
that.
you don't.
but-
You don't have to.
Well, but to get recognized in that way, I mean, most people would put their eternal flame. It's going to be there. It was given by Atlanta Gas Light and WSB, and they made a big deal out of it. We had a service here. Charlie, you may remember this. I came over because I wanted to be here. Most people put them in parks because, parks aren't going to go away. And I thought, I'd put this in a park. I can put it anywhere I want to. So I came over and talked to Brad Curry.
Oh, Brad.
And Brad came over to talk to Dan, and I said, well, Brad, it can be back over here in the corner, somewhere. He calls me up today, he said, no, we're putting it in the front of the church. It's right out there on Peachtree Street. They even changed the fence. And what Brad was saying is, that's part of the history of this place.
That's right.
Not just me, but the ministry.
That's right. Exactly.
And that we always need to remember, from whence we
Yes.
come, what we stand for, what we've
Yes.
sustained over time. Another thing, Peter, is we didn't think back then, we're going to create something that'll be here in 40, 45 years. We weren't thinking that way. And yet, and we've talked about this before, the Training Counseling Center, I don't know a place that's been so blessed with great leadership.
Absolutely.
All the way through the years.
Absolutely.
Because in 45 years, you're going to get
There's only a few.
you're going to get a
leaders.
bad leader there somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
But
We have not here, and that thanks to Charlie,
Thanks to
and-
Charlie.
and the board
Yeah.
to keep picking people that didn't have to take a left turn or pivot, could build on what was here. And I would
was
say those
so
core
important.
values, as we're here today, we can see those things still living out.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can see that in you
Yeah.
and the work that you're doing today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, this is so meaningful to me, because I've been calling you at least once or twice a year for several years. Like, are you coming down to Atlanta? Because I've wanted to meet you and also to capture this amazing history that you were at the very beginning of this wonderful organization that I hope will go on for many, many years.
Well,
and another piece of it, not to butt in here, Peter, but I want you to speak to this, is that what we began here continued through Peter's ministry everywhere he's been. He went to Augusta
that's
from here. I
lovely.
remember you calling me up and saying, boy, we need some help over here in Augusta.
Yeah,
Could we have a community kitchen? Could we have a food bank? Peter created that in Augusta.
Yeah.
And I would be sure that you've had that kind of ministry everywhere you've been.
And we had, we didn't get the CPE center going because I was so busy as the rector of that parish, but we got the soup kitchen going
Sure
in the
did.
parish and then in another location also. And
And a food bank.
and a
which grew
food
out of
bank.
St. Paul's.
And the people, who most of them lived up on the hill, which is the wealthy section,
Oh, right.
didn't know quite what to do about that. And thought that I was changing the church into something else. But anyhow,
Wouldn't that be a theme for you, Peter? Nobody quite knows what to do with Peter Thomas, right?
yeah.
I think so.
But then the next thing you know, I got a call from the cathedral in Birmingham, Alabama. And the first thing they wanted me to do was, Larry Gibson was the person who was the dean, and he and I had become close friends in a clergy a group for downtown clergy in the New South, we called ourselves. And Larry wanted me to come over there. He said, now, Peter, you know that I can do a lot with the preaching and the services and all that, but I need somebody who can do something with people. And so I said, what you got in mind? And so lo and behold, we went to Birmingham, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience there. And I started a CPE center there. And also we were working with people, not so much as the soup kitchen concept, but we had a lot of people coming in off the streets and a lot of counseling that was happening.
You know, I think another piece, because you could speak to this, what is it, every 5 years you have to go through?
Right.
Right? So the first time, we didn't sleep for 3 days. We weren't sure we could get accreditation. Of course, you sweat through it every time.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, this was a new idea. We had no idea if they would allow CPE
in this
a church.
context.
Right.
Yeah,
They were in prisons and
work
hospitals.
that out. Yeah.
Yeah, for many years, we were one of 2 centers in the country that had CPE in this context.
That's right.
And more recently, a few others have joined
It
us.
was really the first one in the South. And
yes.
of course, there were also some opening up in Texas, but at some point, but really in terms of working with the poor, this was unique, and that was, and what we tried in Birmingham that brought on other issues, and we were able to get into that whole experience.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear you talk a little bit about CPE, because that's my bag. You know, I'm a CPE educator. So, what was it like in the with beginning CPE here?
Well, it was a lot of writing.
Oh, okay.
You had to be able to write and then talk and put, and coordinate what was happening. And, I was trying to put all of that together.
Yes, a lot of
It
work.
was key, there was no models. We're creating a model. So the writing was the vision.
And we had to go ahead with the vision, and Charlie was involved in that, Bill was involved.
Yeah.
We had to talk about that, because then we had a group from CPE which would come. What I did, 2 things. I got involved with Leadership Atlanta, and Bill's done that. But I also got involved with the ACPE in the South, and got on their board to begin to understand about how accreditation occurred, not only for us, but also to go other places to do the supervision of the accreditation at that point. And that was very helpful. And so that's the reason I got the one going in Birmingham. And then I went from there to Houston.
Did it ever get any easier, Peter?
No, it didn't. It was a difficult and
it was very challenging,
very conflicting. I did not have a CPE center in Houston because they had so many going on in the hospitals. But I got there and got involved with a way of developing lay leadership in doing pastoral care in hospitals. It was called the Community of Hope. And I think that's still going.
That's beautiful. Is that sort of like a Stevens ministry that you got going?
Except what we found, if we wanted to get people trained in the Stevens ministry, it was so expensive. So what we did, we created our own, which was not expensive.
That's perfect. Yeah.
And then I had 63 people at St. Martin's who became chaplains, some in parish, going around to the retirement centers, some in going downtown. And we didn't do CPE at that point because it was more what we were developing for that experience. So that was a good experience.
Another thing I would mention, and this was the blessing for me to begin my work, and I'm in my mid to late 20s before I got, the call. As Tom Bowers used to say, the hippie kids down at living in the commune. We didn't think of ourselves that way. But what was so important for me, and you can see it through the last 40 years, is that what I came to understand, didn't get this in graduate school, wouldn't have got it anywhere else. And it reflects in the mission of the food bank, and the whole philosophical underpinnings of the food bank started here. And that was that food was a tool for transformation. The work is transformation. It's not logistics.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now people, I remember writing an article a few years ago called Living in the Meantime, right? So until the rapture or whatever happens and we all get aligned here, people still got to eat. So I understand there's real work to do, right? But if you couch it into, our mission was to engage, educate, and empower the community, right, to fight hunger.
Right.
That began here, right? It was the community that we invited here to teach us. And I think that's been the basis for the work of the food bank. And I've helped start food banks around the Southeast. I've helped start food banks around the world. And that's the basic teaching.
Yeah. I remember when I went to the food, brought my students there. We have now in Atlanta, we have an annual CPE day where all the CPE centers from around this region in Atlanta gather for a day of education and community. And about 130 people come usually. And so I wanted to do something in service, and the food bank folks helped me, organized it beautifully. We had them working in the garden, working, sorting food, working in the kids in need. So they were working several places along with the food bank. But one of the things when they gave us the talk at the food bank, they said, well, they could, this may have been when you were talking to my students, but this always stuck with me. Well, we could have hired people to do the sorting of the food. But it's much more
easier and cheaper.
Easier and cheaper, but it's much more powerful if you get people in and get them to take ownership of the food bank. And I've never forgotten that.
Yeah. Well, that happened right from the beginning with these women who came, Jenny and Edie and Carolyn, and there's several, I wish I could remember all their names. But these, boy, they got right into it. And they didn't blink. They figured out ways. And also restaurants that they could go to and say, if you got some extra food, put it in a pail and we'll take it over and we'll make soup out of it.
You remember, right, just 2 blocks down the street was the first Pleasant Peasant.
Oh, right.
At Steve's restaurant. His first one, and it was supposed to be high-end special place. We'd go there in the morning before things opened up, and they had big pails of cheese bread. Cheese bread was one of their, and I'd always be, bread's good. You got to eat meat under here, and you start pulling it out. That was the beginning of what became Atlanta's Table. One of the programs at the food bank was to learn how to work with restaurants with prepared food. Happened right here, right in the street.
That's amazing.
One other thing I wanted to say, our daughter has followed her mother's and my steps, and she is now with the Interagency on Homelessness and is the coordinator for the Northwestern United States in that area.
Wow.
And Katie, I don't think came down here to the soup kitchen because she was too young. I think she was 4 years old at that time, or maybe a little younger. But but it was, this has been a very big part of our life.
Your family's life.
That reminds me of another story, Peter, and you would really resonate with this. Woman at All Saints calls me up one day, and she had 3 grown daughters, all college graduates. One was married already. She said, I always wanted to be an Episcopal priest, and I'd like to start that process. She'd already been to see the bishop. So she came to me, and we spent all afternoon together, talking about it, and she was very interested in what we were doing here. But I remember when she let me out of the car, and she went on to become a very effective, very good priest. But I remember when she let me out of her little van, she said, "Well, Bill, if there's anything I can ever do for you, just let me know. You've been so helpful to me." And I don't know why I thought about it, because I had kids, 8 and 10 years old. I said, "Well, how do you raise 3 children and get them to college, 3 daughters, right?" And I never will forget. She said, "Well, just remember, Bill, it's nothing you say."
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes.
Now, of course, we remember sayings of our parents and grandparents, but Katie is an example of, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Of how, of her home life, of her family life, of the values that she grew up in, right? It wasn't a teaching that you got to go out and do this. It becomes part of the culture of a family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we, what we know about what our kids choose to do.
And our son Pete, in many ways, although he's, with a major corporation, but he has a real need to respond to the people he's working with. And so that, God gave us that. And it's so important
That's
in our
beautiful.
life.
Well, I think as what I would call myself a social entrepreneur, as a person who started a lot of programs, what I'm so thankful for is where I began here at St. Luke's, and the relationship with Peter and what I learned early on, theologically about the foundation. What I'm most proud of is that TACC is still here. A lot of ideas come and go, but how do you sustain something? Well, part of it is you keep embracing change, right? You keep hiring and have good leadership. You have people like Charlie who, a continuation on a board. You're not changing that every 3 years. Some people stay with you. So to sustain this vision and idea, and it be just as alive today or even more alive than it was 40 years ago, that's something we can say thanks for. And I'll forever be grateful for that opportunity of where I began.
And without
people
Charlie,
like Peter Thomas.
without Charlie, though, we wouldn't. And some of the
that
other
would have
guys,
been a 3-year idea without Charlie.
well, so that was.